I have 12 o'clock. So I imagine we will be joined as we go by others, but Robin, just let us know when we're live and we can get going. Or Andrew. Okay. I think we're live, but let me confirm.
You're live to me.
Make
we
sure
don't want to break coma here. That's not good.
Yeah, want to make sure we're live out on the internet. I think it says live, so I bet we are, but I just want to make sure. Andrew or Robin, either one, let us know, and then we can get rolling. And this is great though, because we're being joined by others as we're waiting as well. I'm told we are live by somebody who's watching on Slick Harmony. So thank you and welcome everyone for joining for a special meeting today of the Special Committee on Kansas Mental Health Modernization and Reforms System Capacity and Transformation Working Group. And this working group meeting is specifically focused on the legal system and law enforcement recommendations that had been in last year's report, and new recommendations and topics that have been assigned to or suggested or recommended by the special committee for this working group for 2021 as well. So I'm going to share my screen really briefly to go over. I had it up a moment ago for some of you saw, for some of you to see, to go over the agenda. We have a pretty packed agenda, but we want to defer to you all on what you want to spend your time talking about. So we're going to do a brief round of introductions. Want to remind everyone whenever you speak to say your name and identify yourself for those folks who are participating and watching on either Harmony or on YouTube, and for the record. And then we will be looking at and just seeing if anyone wants to discuss any of the previous recommendations from 2020. If we need to update any of those. One of those is related to Criminal Justice Reform Commission recommendations and specialty courts. We do have a specific time scheduled for the second half of the meeting, or the latter part of the meeting, specifically to talk about recommendations related to specialty courts. We're also going to have a presentation from Scott Bruner from ks.gov about the role and competency evaluations, because we heard about that at the special committee. And then we'll also want to hear if you have any other recommendations you want to discuss. We want to do that all in about 1 hour. If you all want to get through part of an agenda faster to get to another part, we definitely can. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to call out folks just to introduce yourselves in the order that I see you on my screen. So if I miss anyone, I apologize. Representative Carpenter.
Good morning, everyone.
I should say I'm Carrie Bruffett from the Kansas Health Institute. I violated my own advice there at the very beginning.
Representative Will Carpenter.
Representative Landwehr.
Representing Brenda Landwehr, Wichita, 105th District.
Jane.
Jane Adams, Case for Networking, Topeka.
Jean.
Jean Clifford at Kansas State Board of Education, District 5.
Judge Gatterman.
I'm Bruce Gatterman. I'm Chief Judge in the 24th Judicial District.
Secretary Jordan.
Yeah, I'm Don Jordan. I'm retired Secretary of SRS. I was also Superintendent of Osawatomie State Hospital and have quite a bit of experience in the mental health field.
Thank you. Kyle.
Kyleessler with the Association of Community Mental Health Centers.
Laura.
Laura Brake, Director of Crisis Services with ks.
Representative Neighbor.
Cindy Neighbor, District 18 in Johnson County.
Judge Picorni. Oh, I believe you're muted. I think I can unmute you. Let me try. There you are.
Okay. I'm Sally Picorni. I am a judge in Douglas County, and I think I've been asked to be on this committee because I do preside over a behavioral health court.
Thank you. Samaya.
Hi, I'm Samaya Parr Kramer, analyst with KHI.
Sandra.
Hi, everybody. Sandra Dixon, Chief Clinical Officer at DECA.
I will skip over Scott because he's going to present and get to introduce himself in a few minutes. Sherry?
Sherry Shook, Pottawatomie County Attorney.
Spence?
Hi, Spence Cohen, the Court Services Specialist, the Office of Judicial Administration.
Andy? Andy Brown.
Andy Brown. Andy Brown. I'm the Commissioner of Behavioral Health Services at ks.
Don?
Don Scheibler, Chief of Police for the Hayes Police Department. Also member of Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police.
Thank you. And then we've got some staff online. So Jenna?
Yes. Good afternoon, Jenna Moyer, Revisor of Statutes Office.
And then Andrew, if folks have technical issues, can they text you or send you a message in the chat? I think that's Andrew Page, but thank you. A couple other folks have joined us, and he says yes. So if you have technical issues, Andrew Padgel will be available to support. Sarah Fertig has joined us. Sarah, if you want to just quickly. Sorry, Sarah, Medicaid Director. And I thought I saw one other person join. Where did they move to on my screen?
Hi, Carrie. It's Brenda Soto with DCF.
Thank you, Brenda.
Sorry I'm late, everyone.
No worries. You just in time. So thank you very much. So I'm going to, again, just share the agenda really quickly, and then I will hand it over and ask my colleague Samaya to share the screen as we talk about issues. But just a reminder, the meeting commitments that you all talked about at the last meeting, come ready to discuss and compromise. We want to keep, particularly with just 1 hour, keep remarks succinct and on topic, but don't hesitate to ask clarifying questions in others' presentations, and then we will commit to start and end on time. So we appreciate that and appreciate the work that all of you have done to get us to where we are so far. So our first 15 minutes or so we have on the agenda, but again, we can do more or less depending upon you all, is to review and look at previous recommendations from 2020. I would suggest perhaps we hold on reviewing 8.2, which was the recommendation related to specialty courts, until we get to a more in-depth discussion, unless you all want to talk about this specifically. But what we would like to do is discuss or allow you to talk about any enablers, barriers, or any proposed revisions you see in any of those previous recommendations before we start digging into the new topics. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Samaya share a working document we could look at. So we will look first at recommendation 8.1. We'll give everybody a moment to read. But this recommendation last year was to expand training provided in correctional facilities to allow employees to better recognize those with substance use disorders, use a trauma-informed approach to identify other mental health needs, and connect those with needs to available services. You'll also see the lead agency, KDADS, and the key collaborating agency, the Department of Corrections, had provided some information to the committee on the status of this recommendation so far. So we'll stop and pause here. We probably only have, if we want to spend time on this one, about 5 minutes to dig into it. Are there any things you all would like to add or discuss about this recommendation? Either barriers, enablers, or potential revisions?
Carrie, Brenda Landwehr here. Is this something that was sent to us?
This is the document that's from our initial meeting. The
Okay,
initial,
that's
yeah.
fine.
And we just squished it down to just the columns that are the law enforcement and legal system recommendations before, or the rows. We just had previously we had rows for all of the recommendations in system capacity and transformation. This is just a little more focused view. I apologize. Should have sent this more focused view separately to you as well.
No, you're fine. Just double checking.
Carrie, I do have a question. This is Bruce Gatterman. When you, I need to be educated a little better. When you reference correctional facilities, are we talking about KDOC, or are you talking about all correctional facilities, including county jails?
The recommendation last year was focused on looking at the language in the background, spoke broadly about correctional facilities. It did not speak only about Department of Corrections, but it didn't specifically say it was county jails as well. I don't know, Andy, if you have anything to add, if in how the KDADS has actually implemented this. Has it been focused on DOC, or is it also included work with counties?
Yeah, so most of the activities have been focused on KDOC facilities. So like the response that they gave about the new entrance screening that they're doing to help identify SUD early, so that they can work with inmates while they're in the facility to prepare them for exit back to the community. Those types of programs have been focused on KDOC side. Our Stepping Up initiative that we've been working on, that's focused more on the county jails and the local courts.
Thank you.
As we're discussing, we're making some changes to try to add those notes, and we'll share this document afterwards as well as part of the meeting notes. So, Judge Gatterman, do you have interest in either revising or maybe clarifying that any language in the recommendation related to county jails?
Well, I think one of the things noted on the agenda that might be barriers would certainly probably be the cost in doing it with county jails, as to whether that's something that is grant funded or whether it's expected to be funded by local jails. In rural Kansas, that's probably a problem with shortage of employees and shortage of resources. That's really why I wanted a clarification. I think it'd be very helpful. You know, here in Pawnee County, of course, our sheriff is pretty well attuned to mental health needs with Larned State Hospital being here, but maybe not so much in the other 5 counties in my district. And it would certainly be helpful on a local level if that was something that could ever be implemented.
Thank you. Other thoughts about this recommendation? Thoughts about maybe noting what the potential for noting in the report what Judge Gatterman raised?
Carrie, Brenda Landwehr here. I think that that's an excellent point, because so many times I think from the legislative level, we're thinking DOC, but in this realm here, we have to look at, I think, all of it. So let's separate the distinctions out, and we'll categorize accordingly as we go forward.
Harry, this is Jane Adams. Is this only for adults? Does it also include kids?
I can maybe speak to that.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, just Jenna Moyer, Revisor Statutes Office. DOC does oversee correctional facilities in the usual understanding of that term, so it would include the Topeka Juvenile Correctional Facility. And if we want to specify state versus local, I would use the term state correctional facilities, and then you could say county and local jails.
And maybe detention centers?
Agreed? Concurred? And local jails and detention centers. Okay. Any other thoughts on this recommendation? I think that was very helpful. Provides different context than we had provided previously. Okay. Consensus where we've got a plan for 8.1. Thumbs up. Okay, let's move on now to recommendation. I'll pause here at 8.2. Do we all agree that we can hold the discussion on 8.2, which is implementing recommendations developed by the Criminal Justice Reform Commission related to specialty courts and developing a process for regular reporting on implementation status and outcomes for our broader discussion of specialty courts, or is there anything specific we want to talk about here before we get to that?
I think Brenda Landwehr here, I think you're right on the target there, Carrie.
Great. Okay. So again, stop me if I'm rushing you all too much and you want to talk more about any recommendation, please do that. We just try to ensure that we get through as many of these as we can when we're all together. But if we need to spend more time, please don't hesitate to stop me. With that, we will go to 8.3. Recommendation that had been reported by the Department of Corrections as completed in its update to the committee at the beginning of the year, but did want to provide the working group an opportunity to review and see if there's anything you'd like to note in addition to that. And that recommendation was regarding law enforcement referrals, increased utilization and development of evidence-based SUD referral, as well as treatment and recovery services among persons with law enforcement contact, which could include securing funding to increase access to services for this population.
Carrie, Brenda Landwehr here is, I think when we talk about the referral and the needs on a law enforcement, I wonder if we need to distinguish between referral to a potential facility with a bed, or if it's referral to direct outpatient services. That's just a question out there.
So this is Andy Brown with ks, and I believe that our interpretation of the original guidance was that that would include both of those, Representative Landwehr.
Okay, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Would it be helpful to add, we don't have to change the language in the recommendation, but maybe add that into the discussion as well as implemented, that's for inpatient as well as outpatient treatment?
Carrie, Brenda Landwehr, I think that that's important, especially as we phase in or not phase in, but we implement 988 next year.
All right, thank you. Other thoughts on recommendation 8.3? Okay, seeing none? All right, we'll have to figure out how to wrap that to make that legible. There we go. Let's move on to recommendation 8.4 from 2020. And there was some discussion of this recommendation in the last meeting, and so Spence, I'm going to go ahead and read this, but if you want to maybe reiterate what you had said in the last meeting as well. But this recommendation was future efforts should include behavioral health within an operationalized definition for youth with offender behaviors at risk of entering foster care, as well as including diverted youth in the definition of the broader juvenile offender population. This recommendation status was reported by Department of Corrections as completed because of the statewide policy team that had been created, and then DCF also provided feedback, and you can read that there. We had noted from our previous meeting that their policy team is in place. That was an enabler, and there had been a discussion of barrier of the communication was a barrier to getting everyone on board statewide. But I'm going to pause and see, Spence, if I recall correctly, you had some comments about that. If you want to reiterate or expand on those.
And this is Spence going with OJA. I think you pretty much summed it up. I'm reviewing my notes from talking with our crossover youth facilitator with OJA, and I think it really he really reiterates that communication needs to be better, and that the statewide policy team can make recommendations, but local agencies are still doing what they feel is best rather than following the standards. So I think what you've said is a fairly good recitation of it.
Any thoughts from the group about what that might mean, or other comments on crossover youth and this recommendation? So one option is we could add those notes as basically, continuing barriers, even though there's been the completion in the progress of creating the policy team, and leave it at that. Or if there's any suggested, I don't know, Spence, do you have any suggestion for modifying the recommendation or just noting that in the report?
Yeah, this is Spence Cohen again. And thinking of it, I think we could make those recommendations that all agencies follow the recommendations of the implementation team. I don't know what the wording for that is or how you get teeth to that, but I think if following recommendations of standards would be beneficial.
And please say again, who are the entities? How would you define the entities that need to align with those recommendations?
So it sounds to me like the agencies that are involved with crossover youth could be local mental health agencies, schools. Probation departments might be involved. SYNC departments might be involved.
Okay.
So it's just basically the whole multidisciplinary team that's involved would need to have better communication and follow standards.
What do folks think of that as a kind of an enhancement or a revision to the 2020 recommendation?
This is Spence Cohen. I like the wording that you put to the revisions.
I like the wording also. This is Cindy in Johnson County. And since we're talking about crossover, I just looked out my door and it is snowing and raining. So it's a crossover. And they're big flakes.
I need to look out the window. Is there does anybody have a different thought about that, or we have concurrence that this was a modification or a revision to the recommendation, but largely keep the recommendation intact? No objections?
Just to be
Go ahead.
clear, this is Andy Brown with KDAS. Just to be clear, the KDOC reported this as completed, and we're modifying it so that we're now asking like local level governments to implement it.
I think that's the discussion, correct?
Okay.
This is Kyleessler, Carrie. And my question then ends up being, and maybe everyone has already concluded this, but would that be implemented then through the juvenile correctional advisory boards? Is that done at the JCAB level? Or Spence, is that kind of what you were thinking?
Honestly, this is Spence Cohen. Honestly, Kyle, I'm not sure how that would work out. That's something I could research a little bit, and I could pass that on back to Carrie to forward on to everybody. I'll make a note of that to make sure where that should go.
This is Bruce Gatterman. I don't have the document in front of me, but I'm chair of our adult and juvenile corrections boards, and I know KDOC sent out a grant opportunity that we've applied for that applies specifically to crossover and diverted youth, and we're working, or our proposal is implemented through the school system and they've agreed to identify youth that could benefit from that type of program. But it's designed for offenders who may also have sync issues. So I think KOC is moving on some implementation. I don't know if we're going to get that grant money or not, but they have floated it out there.
I'll add that as a, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Kyleessler again. I appreciate that, Judge. One of the things that was in my mind was trying to figure out some of the significant funding I think that's available through the Department of Corrections now as a result of youth residential centers closing, and trying to figure out maybe how that money figured in, just because I don't hear about a lot of use of those dollars. And so it would stand to reason that the program structure really hasn't been there. So you saying it makes me wonder if that's maybe that funding source that you're referring to. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So we are at time for this part of the discussion. I'm going to recommend we'll follow up with Spence, as Spence had suggested, and anyone else who wants to send thoughts. And then before our next meeting, we'll compile that and they'll have something for you all to react to, so it can be finalized or discussed at the next meeting. And we'll note that there is another meeting on November 10th, but we will also have a meeting in early December too that we could discuss it as well. So does that make sense? Thank you all. Okay, so we're ready to shift gears and now really talk about specialty courts. So a reminder of if you wouldn't mind scrolling back up, Smaya, sorry, to the previous recommendation. I read it before, but the previous recommendation had been the gold one, sorry, the one in gold. The previous recommendation related to specialty courts was implement recommendations developed by the CJRC related to specialty courts and develop the process for regular reporting on implementation status and outcomes. Now we can scroll down, and I might just move it down to the cell below for a new, whether it's new or just significantly revised, or maybe you all decide you want to really affirm that. But I'd like to pause and just let particularly the Judge McCorney, I know that you're here to talk some about that experience, and Judge Wanell, I think, has joined us as well. In the special committee meeting last week, there were presentations on specialty courts. Sean Jurgensen, Special Counsel of the Chief Justice, presented and mentioned 2021 House Bill 2361, which is now in Senate Judiciary. That bill would assist the judicial branch in locating and securing more funding for specialty courts. So some potential for, should that bill be referenced, or are there other recommendations this group would like to make? But I'll pause and and see if any of the judges on the line would like to talk a little bit about this to add to what folks learned about last week about specialty courts.
This is Sally Picorni. I wasn't able to attend last week, so I don't know what I could add. If there's anything that would be helpful from this group to recommend for the legislature to do potentially, or others to do. The presentations last week in the special committee were talking about the experiences of some of the specialty courts. So people have learned about how they work. So I think the questions for today are, okay, what recommendations could come from it? Is there anything that would be helpful from your perspective that the state could do to support specialty courts? The behavioral health court where I preside is solely funded by our county.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are interested in making sure that people throughout the state of Kansas, regardless of the wealth of the county where they live, have an opportunity to participate in a specialty behavioral health court, then it's incumbent upon the state to provide funding. And go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
When we were investigating the possibility of forming a behavioral health court, the team that was working together all agreed on one thing: is there is no point in having a specialty court that is simply a feel-good rah-rah court. You need to do better. You need to figure out where to find your mental health providers. You need to figure out where to find substance abuse counseling. it was incumbent upon the court to make sure that the services were available to people who entered into behavioral health court. And if we couldn't provide the services, then there just wasn't much point in having a specialty court. And I still believe that that is the case. Even with lots of wraparound services, we are not always successful. And without any services, I think a specialty court is just doomed to fail.
So did I interpret correctly sort of both the two themes you're talking about is funding to support if we want more, if this group is interested in expanding the number of specialty courts, that funding was probably going to be needed, and that as communities are looking at, they need providers and services basically to be able to work with the courts and be able to refer people to. Did I capture that correctly, or how is there a better way to say that?
Nope, perfect.
And Spence had raised that in our last meeting as well.
Okay. The other issue that we have discussed is there's been some thought of trying to start a veterans court in Douglas County. Next door, we have Johnson County that does have a veterans court, and this may just be a terrible can of worms, but for limited resources, we were thinking, is there any way we could transfer venue of certain cases to Johnson County in order for those people to participate in veterans courts? Once again, not spreading out services, duplicating services within 20 miles of each other. Is there any possibility of legal recognition of maybe regional specialty courts?
Thank you. Judge Wanell, I know you had some thoughts that were related to this as well. Is there anything you would like to share? And I hope you're still on.
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo Judge Corney's comments as it relates to the resources. As we are looking at expanding our behavioral treatment court here in Johnson County to post-sentencing, pre-sentencing type of issues beyond the AOT docket that we have right now, services is definitely an issue. I mean, we're fortunate that we really partner with Johnson County Mental Health as it relates to case management and the provision of services. But as Judge Picorni stated, and really what was kind of a common theme at the legislative hearing last week as it relates to rural and frontier areas, how are those services going to be accessed? Up until about 10 minutes ago, I hadn't thought about the idea of a regional specialty court. I'm intrigued by Judge Picorni's suggestion on that. As far as transferring to Johnson County, I would say sure, but we probably should bring Judge McCarthy in on that. But no, I think it's a great point that I hadn't really thought about. It does, and that may be where more of a state funding type of issue starts to appear, because if you've got a regional setting where you've got 2 to 5 counties who are going before a particular specialty court, whether it's drug or veterans or behavioral health, then the service is recommended. If they're driving down once every 30, 60, 90 days, depending on the docket setting, and then they're engaged in some type of services, what does that look like if a Douglas County judge is going to, recommend services, try to set up services with someone who's in Atchison, or likewise Johnson County for somebody from Miami County? I hadn't thought about that till today. I'm really interested in the concept of regional specialty courts. I don't think the court appearances would be difficult for people as it relates to periodic travel. I don't know about the services. I think the services might need to be a little bit more local, but I definitely am interested in that idea. The only other issue that I thought of last week at the legislative hearing when we heard all the testimony from Judge Brown and Judge McCarthy was, in Johnson County in particular, Judge McCarthy got the Veterans Treatment Court up and running through grant money, and then got to a point where the county was able to provide the coordinator. I know as we look right now in expanding our behavioral treatment court beyond the AOT docket that we have right now, Every time I come up with an idea or an added expansion of it, I can just see my administrative assistant start to cringe at the additional work, and she's great and she's doing a good job. But I know right now our county is fully funding the coordinator position, but it didn't start that way. So from a state level, in addition to resources, I'm wondering if we don't look at qualifying criteria, whether that's, number of people or what the court looks like, but maybe some type of state funding assistance as it relates to a coordinator position for these specialty courts, because they really they don't just run a schedule, but as far as answering questions and emails about resources and where they need to go, those would be two issues that I think that we could look at as far as recommendations.
It's interesting. I wonder if those are separate or if they're potential. This is Carrie Breff with KHI. Are you thinking, again, you said you hadn't thought of the regional model until Judge Picorni just raised it a few minutes ago, but could that be combined with the specialty court coordinators as well? Or do you think of those as distinct recommendations?
I think there could be distinct recommendations. I think the reason that I brought up both is if we look at this particular block point on the shared screen right now about funding, I suspect someone who makes a decision on funding might read that and think, okay, well, give me some more specifics of what are you looking for as far as funding. And that's kind of where I would say the coordinator position or coordinator assistance or resource coordination, whether that's, county supplement or subsidy to available resources. I don't know yet. I think it's going to take some work, but I think if we're looking at the component of just funding or how funding can help specialty courts in Kansas, I think you could put them together for that purposes.
This is Sally Picorni again. This is small, the very small potato kind of thing, but our coordinator for behavioral health court is also the administrative coordinator for our drug court. So she has two specialty courts that she tries to wrangle and keep in line, keep everybody advised of the upcoming agendas, all of our schedules, also as the go-to person for anybody that has any questions about the specialty courts. She has all the documents, all the brochures, the handbooks, all of that kind of thing. So she's definitely kept busy in her role. For two courts, I would think trying to be an administrator for multiple courts in multiple counties would be a huge job. And she attends all the hearings too, to take notes, so that we have really, besides the court reporter, who takes the actual hearings, our pre-meetings. She's the person that takes all the notes and maintains those notes as to our prior decisions and discussions.
So it sounds like that might argue for keeping those distinct recommendations, sort of regional and or two parts of a recommendation, regional specialty courts and funding for court coordinators. Judge Wanell, again, maybe after criteria have been established. So what does the group think about that as that is sort of a two-part recommendation? I see some heads nodding. I can't see everybody's head since we're screen sharing. I'm going to wave. I got to see thumbs up. Anybody have any concerns or anything else that they would like to see addressed? And we can go ahead.
Carrie, this is
going in.
Cindy Niebuhr.
Go ahead.
Represents Cindy Niebuhr. I think what both judges have said is very important, because if you're coming to the legislature, and all of you well know, over the last several years, we've had issues with not funding courts properly and or shortages. And I want to make sure that that funding is there so that all this work can be done, and we don't leave anybody hanging. So I think it's a good idea to put both in there, because there's a requirement that the funding has to come from someplace, and we need to have those doors open.
Carrie, Representative Landwehr here. I think that where we start with the specialty courts was understanding them, which is what we got at our last full meeting, get a handle on how they are funded in these different areas. Because the intent as we started this discussion was to see what we could do to encourage, I think, local units to perhaps look at funding some of these. It's not necessarily, a state deal, but it doesn't mean that we don't look at it on a state level. But Representative Neighbors is correct. Funding is always a major issue. And as we learned last year, as we went through this mental health stuff, funding was a barrier on many things. So we need to make sure that we don't just put a barrier of funding out there. If we can perhaps encourage and share with and show ideas and ways for the local units of governments to fund.
So one thought is the way the recommendations are developed is there's an opportunity to talk about the lead agency, what's the lead agency, and what are the barriers and potentials. So so the idea of regional specialty courts, it sounded like there was maybe two parts of it, the components. One is the funding component, but the other part is just the ability to do that, to have that kind of regional organization. So and then what Judge Wanell was talking about specifically for the court coordinators has a funding component as well. So the recommendation from this group would be to be able to build on that, as Representative Landwehr said. But there could be options in the language about the funding source, or how do you all, one option we could do is develop language based on what you all just said. And then in between meetings, we'll talk about the, as you'll see in the criteria, if you scroll down just a little bit, Samaya, so you can see scroll up. There we go. If you recall, those of you on the working groups, the ease of implementation, the potential for high impact, the kind of questions were, what is this? Is this a program change? Does this require a change in the law? Is cost a barrier? What kind of strategies for sustainability does it include? That kind of thing. We would follow up that after we develop initial language, after you all develop initial language, and that would be the next step in the recommendation. We're not going to do it in this meeting because we only have 1 hour. So we would try to do that using survey and other tools to do that, to follow up, and then also talk about potential impact for high impact. So this is just a reminder. We're not going to try to fill it out right now in the time frame that we have. But thoughts from the group? How about that as a way to move forward? With sort of the caution that Representative Landwehr raised about if all the eggs are in the basket of the state funding it, does that limit its ability to be recommended? Are there other ways to make it actionable that can depend on other funding sources, potentially the state funding as well as other funding? Or how would you like to phrase that?
I don't know about the phrase. This is Cindy Neaver. I don't know about the phrasing exactly, Carrie, but we have to start somewhere. And I think the funding issue, local, how do you work with the state? Can the state and the local entities work together and explore those options so that we have ideas to share with communities, and we just don't say it's your job to fund it, but here are some things we've been thinking of, and you might want to, put these in place, or it might help you to at least get the door open and get the process started.
And this is Kyleessler, Carrie. And I agree with both representatives. Really, I think that from the community mental health center standpoint, what we've seen in terms of how the crisis intervention centers have worked at the local level, initially in Kansas City and then several other places around the state. Now there are multiple counties that actually will collaborate and provide funding for their regional crisis centers. So there's a model out there for this potentially, and it has certainly been subsidized and seed money provided by the state. But I think to have those kind of conversations is really helpful, both at the committee then level and then hopefully at the local levels.
Right. Jenna Moyer, Revisor Statutes Office, and I will just note for the committee that a venue transfer or regional specialty courts would likely require legislation. and creating a system for regional specialty courts would not be a tiny bill. And so if it's something that the committee really wants to move forward with and have it ready, it'd be a good idea to start working with their revisor if you have a legislator who wants to work with you.
The only comment I would add on that, and I don't really get into the funding issues, but on that note from the revisor's office, I will just tell you, I think it's something worth exploring. I've done my AOT docket for the last 18 months virtually. And if we have a capacity to do that, I think it's something worth exploring. Again, I'm not really talking about the funding. I'm talking more about the framework. And I realize it wouldn't be easy as it relates to, especially if you've got a post sentencing type of issue in the jurisdiction. I get that, but I think it would be interesting to explore Judge Picorni's suggestion.
I'm going to call time if that's okay with you all, unless anybody had a really crucial additional comment, because we wanted to make sure we had a little time for the presentation from KDADS about competency evaluations, because that also followed up a discussion in the special committee. But any last, it's not your last thought. We'll have a chance to collaborate in the future, but I think we have a pretty good sense for where the group is going. Everybody feel pretty comfortable with where the conversation is. There's still more discussion to come. Agreed? And thank you, Jenna, for that point. Okay. With that, we'll stop sharing for a moment the screen and allow Scott Bruner to introduce himself from KDADS to talk about the state hospital role and competency evaluation. And then from this, he'll hopefully have time for questions. He'll just go for about 10 minutes or so. And then if we run out of time in talking about how we might want to develop a recommendation, we will follow up using the survey format to get feedback from you all on that as well, and in future meetings. But go ahead, Scott, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Coming across. Okay, great. So my name is Scott Bruner. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Hospitals and Facilities at KDADS, and was asked to provide a little, I think it's additional information about mobile competency, kind of what our experience has been at Larned State Hospital. So I pulled some information together from the superintendent and her team. And some of this is information we've shared with the Sentencing Commission and another venue that was interested in a similar topic. Since you've already had some discussion about this, and I wasn't a party to that at the time, Carrie tried to share it with me, and I retained maybe not quite enough of it. So I don't want to duplicate anything, but I will go through this in kind of a quick fashion so you can ask questions if you have them, or make a request for other information that I didn't anticipate. And I think Carrie and the research team will share the slides, so I'm not going to expect you to read them, but did try to put in a little bit of background about Larned and the program structure. What we're talking about with mobile competency is in our state security program, which is the state hospital, the part of the state hospital that deals with folks that are in the forensic side of the psychiatric system. And this fits into kind of how we accept admissions, and the bottom line is that there's one state hospital that serves the entire state of Kansas for mobile, or for forensic competency evaluation and restoration work, or referrals for people who aren't competent to stand trial. And that's all at Larned State Hospital, which is good that it's one place, but has some other limitations that I'll try to talk about. We do take admissions, again, from across the state. Those all come in a fairly standard format. And then the one barrier is because we're out of space and the number of potential admissions that we have, there is a waiting list. So that's a time-based waiting list for a bed, and kind of first come, first served. So I did put a couple of slides in here, and I won't be able to do these justice just talking about them, but it's our admissions for the month of September for males is on the slide now, and there's also data for females. And I guess what I would point out is kind of the critical element, or describe what's on. You can read the categories on the rows. The columns are the different types of either competency evaluations that the statute requires, or competency treatment that the statute requires, and then by type. And so we count a referral based on the way they're arriving at our door. So if it's a 3302 that's somebody who's been referred by a court for a competency evaluation. There are other kinds of evaluations that we do as well, and so that's indicated on the columns. So we'll take patients for competency evaluation to determine if they're fit to stand trial. We also then take people on the treatment side once they're found incompetent, but they can be restored to competency to stand trial. We do that treatment as well. And so that's the two parts of the chart here. And I guess what would be important is we admitted one patient for a competency evaluation, one male, in the month of September, and they waited for 322 days to get in. The average is around 150 or 170 days, but there are highs and lows. The graph kind of shows that as well. This is the same kind of data for females, which are a smaller number, and the waits aren't quite as long, but there's also not as many beds available for that in the chart for that. What I was asked to talk about primarily was mobile competency. So that means that instead of having the person transported to Larned from wherever they are in the state to have their competency assessed or restored, we've created a mechanism where we can do that where the person is in the jail where they are in the county where they're currently being held. And so we can get that through the court order that assigns the person for competency evaluation to Larned. If it has enough flexibility and that says we can do that at the jail, or an agent of Larned State Hospital can conduct that, we can go to the jail, do the competency evaluation there, and then the person can move through the rest of their court process without the delay in time to come to Larned. The same's true for competency restoration, which is a longer treatment cycle to try to restore somebody to competency. We can also do that mobily. There's a few more difficulties with that, which I'll talk about here in just a second. I'll talk about it right now. So for mobile competency, because that does require usually medication, usually some level of therapy, some level of clinical intervention. It doesn't work for every defendant that is that needs that kind of care. And it doesn't work for every defendant where they are. Probably most of them would need to come to Larned or some other facility for that treatment. But we do an assessment if that's a possibility for a defendant. We look at their clinical criteria and presentation to see if mobile restoration is a possibility. And so I listed here on the slide kind of the common considerations. They're not a risk to themselves or others. So anybody with a violent background or violent tendency, that wouldn't be a likely thing we'd suggest. That they're probable to have their competency restored in the 90 days that we have to do it. If we think it's going to take longer, they're not a good candidate. They have to be fairly compliant with treatment and medications and motivated to do that, and not have something else medically going on. So that isn't for everybody. The mobile evaluation is a little more likely for, I don't know, most people, but that is more common. I also put some information in there about another option that we've developed called same-day evaluations, where we can group defendants and bring them to the campus and do multiple evaluations on the same day to try to move through the waiting list. And that's worked fairly well in the examples where we've done it. On this chart, we tried to graph out how many mobile competency evaluations we've done by month. That's the blue bar, and the orange are the number of same-day evaluations. We haven't done very many same days since we've been enthralled with COVID, because that is just complicated. But the mobile competencies, over the last couple of months, we've either done 4 or 2. September didn't make it onto this chart. Accidentally, we did 4 in September as well. And not a huge number, but again, they do move some people through the process. I didn't do the coloring, but we did color in a map of the counties where we've done some mobile competency or have an arrangement to do that. You can see those in yellow, and the ones in pink are where we've done some same day evaluation work, primarily from Sedgwick County and Pawnee County. But that'll give you an idea of the counties where we've either worked with judges to get mobile evaluation, competency evaluation in the order to give us that possibility, and then we dispatch our contractor to those counties to do that work. And then we just captured a few of the obstacles or bottlenecks that we see in the process. I won't belabor too much of this. We mentioned a couple of different kinds of delays. Those could be delays on our side or in the court process. That isn't meant to be a judgment, just something that we do experience. COVID's had an impact, of course. And our capacity at Larned has had an impact, and that capacity is driven by how many COVID cases we have, how much staffing we have to keep the units fairly full, and all those things have kind of contributed to the wait list creeping up over time. But where mobile competency would help with that, because it doesn't require somebody to come to the campus, and our contractor can make that work in more of a direct way without the transport, the time related to that, and just the delay in getting people in because of the wait list. It's a very, I tried to expedite the presentation just to get the information there. As you look at the slides, if you have other questions, I'm available to answer those by email, or feel free to reach out. But Carrie, if there's some time now, or particularly if there's other data you'd like to see that we can pull together, that would be great to know, so I can get the team to work on that part of it.
Thank you, Scott. So as folks are thinking about questions for Scott, one thing to be thinking about is maybe from this sheet or others, are there any obstacles or bottlenecks that a recommendation could address? And maybe that's a question both for Scott and for you all. But I'll pause now and say who from the working group may have questions for Scott or any comments to make on this issue.
This is Spence Cohen. Just a question. When I look at these obstacles and bottlenecks, do you believe that Osawatomie State Hospital, if not legislatively prohibited, would they have the staffing capacity to help with specifically, I'm thinking the mobile units? Would they be able to go out and do that if they were allowed?
Possibly. So the mobile competency, we actually use a contract service to do that. It's a contractor that provides some other evaluation and therapy services on the Larned campus. So we've talked about in the last year using some of our own clinicians to go out and do this work, and we've got haven't quite resolved how their liability coverage would work when they're not on the campus. Some of their licenses and malpractice is tied to work they do on the physical grounds, and so it may not cover when they go off site. But there could be some. We have talked about that if there was a real tricky case, or a long somebody who's way up in the 300 days for waiting, if we could get out and do those from where we are with either our clinicians or contractors. So there'd be some. I think it's more of a malpractice obstacle than anything else. We have one vendor that does this work. We could probably see if there are other vendors that maybe would have more possibilities as well. We just haven't pursued that at this point to try to be a little more efficient with the process.
I'd just like to make a comment, and I know KDADS is doing the best it can within the resources available, but the bottom line is we have people who are sitting in jail in Douglas County throughout, and they are presumed innocent. They're too dangerous to release on a bond to wait to be transported for the restoration to competency. And they flatten their sentence, any sentence that could be imposed by the time they get to Larned and are back. And that is a miscarriage of justice and a misuse of our jails. That it is a crisis, a constitutional crisis, as far as I am concerned. And of all the things we've talked about, this to me is a major priority that needs to be dealt with by the legislature. And if that means building a whole nother regional state hospital, then that's what needs to be done. Thank you. And thank you for your service, Mr. Bruner. I know that KDADS is working as hard as they can, but you just don't have the resources.
Scott, this is Bruce Gatterman. Looking at your chart, there's a large number on the wait list and average days on the wait list that are 3302s A lot of ours in rural Kansas are done by mental health centers as to that initial evaluation. And then if they're found not competent, they're on the referral list to go to state security hospital. Is that not happening statewide?
It does happen in many other counties and districts, Your Honor, that where the mental health center does the evaluation, but not everywhere. It would be, and I've looked at it just not recently of those people waiting for the 3302s where they are, to see if that might be a targeted intervention. I know that the team at Larned has done that in the past. It does, those days do stack up, but so it isn't. I don't know what the right word to use. It's not consistent that every mental health center does those evaluations, but many do. And maybe I wouldn't point to Mr. Kyleessler, but he might be able to share if he's aware.
Let me pause just for a moment. It is 1 o'clock. It's actually 1:01 now. So we are at the end of our hour. I know some folks have to log off, and we will log off shortly. But if folks had an additional question for Scott, we can do it. But otherwise, we will plan on following up using both the Qualtrics and then a future meeting, and then those perhaps reaching out with the judges again to try to find a time if that's something you want to spend a little bit more time talking about. But we potentially could have some language for you all to react to before a subsequent meeting. But I'll pause just to see if anybody else has any discussion or questions.
And I'll get that county of jurisdiction information for the wait list numbers, just because that is important. I should have done it for today. I apologize for that.
Carrie, Brenda Landwehr here. I'll get my name out. I think Scott, the judge brings up an excellent point. So we need to have those numbers separated out. We need to know what counties are able to use the CMHCs. We need to find out, is there a way for us then to use the telehealth side, or virtual, whatever we want to call this, to maybe expedite some of that? Because then I'm kind of wondering if our numbers aren't a little bit skewed, or that people are waiting that could have the quicker CMHC evaluation versus the extensive that is probably needed on these individuals. And I might also add a comment about the judge on the regional. I know that in our conversations with Secretary Howard, we're in the process of looking for where a new regional would be, and that doesn't move very fast, but it's definitely on our radar because we recognize the need. So thank you.
It's part of the discussion. Absolutely.
So thank you all. And in the interest of time, I think we could probably talk about this for quite a bit longer. I know that earlier that was Judge Picorni who is talking about the experience in Douglas County, just to follow up and make sure that folks listening online knew that as well. But I will have a couple reminders for you. The next working group meeting of this working group is actually next Wednesday, November 10th at 1 o'clock. On Friday, you received a survey to look at other previous recommendations from 2020 that we haven't talked about either in this meeting or before. And it was also sent to folks who might not have been able to join today's meeting if they wanted to weigh in on the topics today. So hopefully we have a chance to look at those if you have any feedback to add by Friday. Also, if you recall after the last meeting, and we'll resend this around, there was a Word, kind of a worksheet just in Microsoft Word that allows you to develop any new recommendations. So if there's anything that strikes you all from our conversations today, or any of the other new assigned topics that you'd want to propose for the working group to discuss next week, we ask for those by Wednesday of this week so we can get those compiled and get information going. We will resend out that worksheet so you remember what that looks like as well. And the worksheet is also posted in the original meeting materials on the KHI and committee websites as well, but we will email it around as well. And then between now and the next meeting, we'll also try to reflect what we heard in this conversation. We'll share any information we get back from Scott or anyone else if on the other topics we've talked about that you'd like to have shared with the group, and then we'll also make that available for the public through the committee's website and the working group website. Any last thoughts or questions? So we've got a Wednesday worksheet deadline, a Friday survey deadline, and see you all next Wednesday, or as many of you can next Wednesday, November 10th. You get 90 minutes for that one. Seems like we might have needed 90 minutes today, but it's hard to get 60 minutes with the judges. So I'm glad we had them when we did. So thank you very much, Judge Gatterman and the other judges for joining us as well, and Chief Scheibler as well, and all of the rest of you for joining us today. Thanks a bunch, and we will see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.